Good afternoon or good morning to those of you on the other side of the world. Thanks for joining today's live stream, which is not going to be about me for a change. It's going to have a special guest who I shall introduce shortly. But today is mostly, well, it's actually pretty much gear focused and technique focused. So you're not going to see Capture One, which is a bit of a departure from us, but every now and then we like to talk about gear, we like to talk about technique, and impart some of that knowledge as well. To those of you on YouTube and Facebook, welcome. So if you would like to ask a question to Rachel, just pop that in the comments on YouTube and Facebook and we will be able to pick that up. For those of you who are hanging out in the webinar room, if you find the Q&A tab, that's better to put the questions in there because then they get separated out from the chat. But of course, you're very welcome to use the chat and talk amongst each other, of course. But any questions that you have for Rachel, then pop those in the Q&A tab and I will keep an eye on those. And we've also got Diego hanging out in that chat as well. At least I think he is. Pretty sure he is. Anyway, someone's hanging out in there anyway. All right. So today we've got roughly an hour to spend and it's not going to be me talking. As I said, it's going to be mostly Rachel. So let's go and find Rachel. Hey, Rachel, how's it going?
It's going wonderful. Thank you so much for having me, David.
Always a pleasure. This is the, I don't know, third time I think we've had you on as a guest. And we were supposed to do this back in, well, the winter earlier on this year, but unfortunately you got sick and we couldn't do it. And I got sick as well, and I'm still recovering from something now. But now we're just about well enough to pull this off as well. And to explain a little bit about yourself, just give us the 30-second introduction.
Okay, Cole's Notes version.
Yep.
My name is Rachel Jones-Ross, and I'm a landscape and astrophotographer from the Canadian Rockies. So Banff National Park and Jasper National Park are home to me. I love night photography, so I can't help but go there when I talk. So I'll cover a little bit of that. And coming from Canada, I deal with the cold a lot. So winter is my favorite time of year to do photography, to be out with my camera, even though it's a little cold. So I'm here to share a little knowledge on how to manage your temperature and how to manage your gear and how to go out there and actually have a little bit of fun when the weather's a little more challenging.
Yep, fun's important as well, isn't it? And to explain, you're not at home at the moment, you're actually out on the road working. So thanks for taking time out of your day to talk to us as well. So it's very much appreciated you giving up an hour for us. So today's subject is talking about the cold, which is very apt today because it's freezing here, and how to, as we spoke about, Rachel, protect yourself, protect your gear, and a few other tips for shooting as well. So shall we share your screen?
Yeah.
And we can see your presentation. There we go. Cool. Take it away. Oh,
Okay.
and sorry, Rachel, before you start, going to say again, we like to be interactive. So if you do have a question for Rachel, I will interrupt Rachel as we go and fire those questions on your behalf. So over to you, Rachel.
Yes, absolutely. I highly encourage questions. I have a teaching background, so I get really excited when people ask questions because that means I haven't lost you. You're not bored of me yet, and maybe my stories are not that. Also, I know that there are a few of you who have logged in today that are maybe attending a workshop with me in the upcoming months, and this is kind of a good feeler for what to expect and some of the gear questions you might have. You're absolutely welcome to ask those. So winter. What comes to mind when you think of winter? So David, what's your first response when you think of
winter?
that?
Well, in the UK where I'm from, sadly it's not snow so much anymore. It's kind of just bleak, I suppose, and dark is what we think of. And sometimes it'd be nice if we had snow. Absolutely.
Okay. So when I was trying to put this together, I was thinking about that winter is actually really different depending on where you are in the world. And for me, it's this kind of stuff. It's snow and ice and all this pretty fluffy stuff. It's also a little on the chilly side. But most people the very first thing they think of when they think of winter is that it's cold. And so we'll address the cold right away and get that out of the way, and then we can talk about other stuff as well. So this is home for me. I recorded here some of the average temperatures in Banff National Park. And as you can see, in November, we get highs of about 1 degree Celsius and lows of about -8 degrees Celsius. And really, although it does get colder in January, you can see it's not that much colder. -4 is just, it's barely below zero. -4, I can go outside in a crop top. Okay, folks, like it's not that cold. -14 would be more the lows we would see overnight. There's definitely no crop tops overnight. And when I go out to shoot, because I'm standing around, I have to bundle up pretty warm. I just realized when I did this, I didn't actually change the amount of snow days when I changed the location. So just ignore the snow. But so interesting.
Not that much snow in Iceland then, yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking about anybody traveling, if you were thinking, oh, I really want to go and photograph some magical winter stuff, and Reykjavik or Iceland is pretty top destination for people. So just as a little comparison, I looked at the temperature there as well. The difference being, on a little island like Iceland compared to the Canadian Rockies is that they're a lot more influenced there by the ocean and the prevailing storms and stuff like that. So even though the averages are quite a bit warmer when we look at the temperature, there's different considerations like the wind. So the wind is actually a really big factor when you go to Iceland. David, you were there in the summer
exactly.
When you rented.
Yeah, so I did the summer trip, which trying to remember that was maybe May, June, something like that, and then back again in end of September. And September was considerably warmer. I took extra clothing in September, which I didn't wear. I didn't take enough clothing in the summer and had to buy clothing like a typical tourist. And it was the wind chill, really. It was just the wind coming from Greenland off the sea, which is what killed it, really. I mean, out of the wind and in the sun it was fine, but the wind chill was horrific.
Yeah, so if you've ever been to Iceland, or anybody's ever been to Iceland, when you rent a car there, they make you sign a waiver that if you park so that you open your door into the wind and the wind takes your door off your rental vehicle, that's not covered. So that's how much wind there is. We don't have policies like that in Canada because we just don't have those really fierce winds that we would have to think about. Oh, well, you have to make sure you park into the wind so the wind pushes against your door and to a closed position rather than swinging it open. So a little different. And then I thought I haven't been to Norway. I'm actually going to Norway in January, looking forward to that very much. So I had a quick look at the temperatures there as well. Again, just ignore my snow days, which in hindsight was a little bit of should have looked at that and seen how that compares as well. So average temperatures aside, we still get some pretty aggressive winter conditions. Typically, if we're going to get really cold temperatures, they're short-lived. So we get a couple of cold days. We'll call it a cold snap. And so I think this was October, and we never get temperatures like this in October, if I remember correctly. You can see the forecast in Canmore was -32, but with the wind chill felt like -46. That's not pleasant. And then the middle shot there is my vehicle temperature gauge, and it said it was -36.5. So these are the kinds of temperatures that most people are really scared of, and they never want to travel when it gets like that. And believe it or not, I can still go out and shoot because I know how to dress for it. So you can prepare for it, and you can still get out there and shoot in these temperatures, but it is a lot more challenging. But it's temporary. These are cold snaps. We don't get this kind of temperature for the whole winter, or we would probably just never go outside.
No. And I'd like to point out to people, or actually if anyone from BMW is watching, that they should sponsor you as a mini driver, because I always assume you'd have some monster Canadian truck or something like that. But you go out in all weathers and survive, and so does the car, in a mini. So it's the best advertising for a four-wheel drive mini I think there is, that because it's destroyed everything in its path pretty much.
I've never been stuck. I run studded winter tires in the winter time, so they have little metal spikes on them, and that kind of gives you a little extra traction in icy conditions. It's a manual, so I have lots of control over, RPMs and braking
Traction
stuff
and
like that.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it just
So
goes to show its tires figure a lot.
it makes a really big difference. Yeah. Okay, so on the flip side of that, so I showed you the scary bit, okay? It's not all winter. It doesn't typically last for weeks on end. This is a couple of days. But on the flip side of that, we also get Chinook weather. This is a term that we use in Canada for a warm wind that blows over the leeward side of the mountain. And with that, we get really warm, dry, gusty winds. And these winds are so warm that we can go from -20 to +20 Celsius in a matter of hours. And so I actually have been out on this ice in January in a t-shirt. It's very, very warm. I'm still wearing micro spikes and little other winter fun things, but I can go out generally, t-shirt, long sleeve shirt weather. So what's really cool about a Chinook is that with that big temperature shift, we don't actually get as much melting as we do sublimation. So sublimation is what happens when basically the snow goes directly to a gas state instead of melting first and becoming a liquid. And so in places like this is Abraham Lake, and so was the slide before. Abraham Lake is very, very famous for these methane bubbles that form. So we get decaying vegetation on the bottom of the lake, and as it decays, it releases pockets of methane, and then methane floats up, but then it gets trapped as the ice starts to freeze. So you get these layers of bubbles, and they can be anything from stacks that look like coins to more, shapely types of things. It's really fascinating, and it happens on most of our lakes, but most of our lakes get snow covered. And then, if there's 4 feet of snow out there, you don't get to see these bubbles. But this particular lake is exposed to that wind all winter long. It's right on the edge of the Rocky Mountains, on the eastern edge. And so it's sort of the point where your weather system is prairie weather meets mountain weather. And so we get a lot of really crazy, beautiful light. We get a lot of crazy winds because it's next to the prairies. And then, of course, we get these Chinooks because it's on the edge of the mountain system. And so all of those things, the wind and the Chinooks, they keep the ice relatively clear. So there'll be periods of time where we get a snowstorm that passes through, and the ice will be snow covered for a day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, what have you. And then once the snow stops, the wind comes out, or we get Chinook weather, and it removes the snow from the ice, which is really, really fascinating. So you can get out there and play. This lake is 30 kilometers long, and these bubbles they can be found in many, many parts of the lake. Some of them are there's so much of it that it's actually hard to find a composition, because you can be like looking around and around and around, and it's just overwhelming because they're everywhere. So finding a shape or finding something compelling can be a challenge. There's a lot of bubbles, but those being able to take those pictures is facilitated by winds and Chinook weather. So I have a little story.
Oh yeah, good story time. Yeah, I was just going to mention. Jim said, "I think I'm more impressed by the Mini than any other gear discussion." So, see, need a sponsorship. Yeah.
I really do. Okay, so this is my friend Vanessa. She was visiting last January or February, and we got some Chinook weather, and we were out there sort of at the tail end of it. So even though there was some sublimation that happened, there was also some melting. So depending on where we were, And these are all different perspectives of us just literally playing around like children on the ice. So she was having a great old time until the frame on the far right, you can see some water bubbling up. So I pushed her into a weak spot on the ice because it was so warm that the ice was melting. This is January. I am literally dying of laughter. I'm cackling so hard. And my poor friend, she's starfished out on the ice and she's terrified. And she's like, Rachel, melting, breaking, cracking. And she just didn't even know how to verbalize that she thought she was in real danger here because she had ended up in this
very evil way to treat your friend.
It was 2 feet of ice, but the very top layer of it had melted in the Chinook. And of course, it's pooling. So I'm trying to grab my starfished friend who's like spread out like a deer on the lake, and she's terrified. So she's rigid and I'm like trying to hoist her up, but I'm laughing so hard that I couldn't even catch my breath. So yeah, I seemed a little more evil than I really am. But yeah, so it's crazy that you can get this kind of weather and this kind of melting. But it does sort of raise some questions about, being out on things like frozen lakes and stuff like that and how to be safe while you're out there. Abraham Lake is a tricky spot actually, because even though we call it a lake, it's actually not a lake. It's the North Saskatchewan River that has been dammed. And so there's a water reservoir under there. And sometimes when they drain the water reservoir, the water actually drops quite a bit below the level of the ice, and then the ice will drop. And so you have to know a little bit about where you are and also a little bit about ice safety to just make sure that you're not out there on thin ice, because if you are out there on thin ice, things can go fairly bad fairly quickly. So we need about 4 inches of ice to support a person up to about 200 pounds. And 5 inches of ice would support a snowmobile or an ATV about 800 pounds, or a small group of people. So when I'm out, I actually carry one of these with me. I'm in Saskatchewan right now, and I actually travel with an ice screw pretty much all the time. I have a little duffel bag in my car that has extra mitts and hats and balaclavas and, just warm things, maybe some chemical hand warmers, and an ice screw, because you never know. But so basically what this little device does is you put it down into the ice and you screw it. It has a coil at the bottom. And as you do, the ice will create a plug that will come up through the top of it. And if I can get through that much, that's more than 5 inches. So I know that I'm safe on the ice. If I see water bubbling up, I might back away slowly and decide that maybe that's not a good idea. I like to have a little more ice under me than less. So I like to be out there with about 6 inches of ice. So if you do decide to go anywhere out playing, I highly recommend getting one of these. It was about $80 Canadian, and well worth it for the safety aspect of it, of just making sure that you're not in a dangerous situation.
Very cool. Question from Harold, but I think you can park this one because he was interested about weatherproofing your lenses and camera and gear and stuff, and we're going to come to that at some point, aren't we?
Yeah. I actually have coming up here pretty quick. So
hold that thought, Harold.
Yeah, it's a great question. So this is, again, out at Abraham Lake. My boots there, you can see I have some spikes on them. Those are micro spikes. They're not crampons. Crampons are big, aggressive, like 1 inch to 2 inch knives, basically, that you can strap onto your feet. And they're more for climbing, for professional mountaineers, climbers. All you really need are like little tiny spikes to dig into the ice to give yourself some traction. People often will buy, there's like a diamond grip style that's more of it doesn't have little claws that dig in. It'll have more of like a bead on it. Those are not good, because if you get on any kind of slope, then you just wipe out, because they don't dig in enough to support you. So playing out on the ice, I like wearing spikes on my boots, because then I'm not going to have an accident or an injury out there. And similar for your camera. So on my tripod, I have spikes. And these are really good in some situations, and in some situations, maybe not ideal. So in situations where you're maybe not in gusty wind, or if you have a little bit of texture there in the ice or the snow, then the ice spikes on the tripods are really good. But if you have a bit of wind and a really smooth surface, it's kind of like putting skates on your tripod, and it will move. I have had to chase my tripod across Abraham Lake before, and I think I mentioned it's 30 kilometers long. It can really pick up a lot of speed if the wind catches it. Sometimes we get 50-kilometer winds or 70-kilometer winds, and I've had to I don't know if you guys have watched the movie Forrest Gump. Run, Forrest, run. And I'm there in all of my clothes, like arms pumping, legs pumping, micro spikes, all of my layers and everything, chasing a tripod with my camera on.
I think I've seen a video of you actually that you've posted of a tripod whizzing across Abraham Lake. So it's a true story. Yeah.
Yeah, many true stories. You would think I would have learned the first time, but no, it's happened many. I thought I was smart once, and I dug one of the little spikes into a little crack, and I thought I was good, but no, the wind was just stronger than that. So another good trick you can use to secure your tripod on really slick ice is actually your lens cloth. Sacrifice a lens cloth to one or two of your tripod legs, and there's just enough warmth from the camera, from the tripod, whatever, that it creates friction with the lens cloth on the ice. And so the lens cloth won't move, and then you have the friction, and the wind can howl all at once, and your tripod will not go anywhere. So lens cloths, very good idea.
Question for you.
Yeah.
On tripod, so Prasad was asking, do claw type spikes, and I will refer to your better knowledge. Does claw type spike better for tripod or a standard one? I've never seen a claw type spike, I don't think.
I haven't seen the claws either, but I'm picturing it, and I would say it's probably the same idea, that if you're on really flat, hard ice like Abraham Lake, that if there's any amount of wind, that would be like having blades, like skate blades on your tripod. So it just depends on the surface. If there's a little bit of that image on the right, you can see where the spike is. There's actually some texture in the ice. So in a situation where there's texture on the ice, then the claws would be good, because then they would, they'd be able to grip into the texture. But a spot like Abraham, the wind not only keeps it clear of snow, but it is hard packed, 2 feet, 3 feet thick, and it's glass. And so if the wind is blowing, everything blows.
We got some clothing questions coming up, but that's
Perfect.
coming next, I think, isn't it? So I'll hold on to those. So we got some shoe questions and some clothing questions as well. Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll hold those till we dig into clothing now.
Okay. So there's no bad weather, only bad clothing. I love that saying. So I come from an academic background. I was working on a PhD when I left to do photography full time, and I was an office girl, or a lab girl. I didn't spend much time outside because I didn't enjoy it. So once I learned how to dress for it, I enjoy it a lot now. So my number one that I mention all the time, everywhere, whenever possible, are these gloves by the Heat Company. I work in some really challenging conditions. I've been out in -40, -50. Again, those are the sort of exceptions. It's, a day or two here or there, but I can wear these gloves, and I've never had frostbite on my fingers since getting the gloves. I did have frostbite about 8 years ago on my fingertips and my face, and I didn't realize what it was until I got home. I'd been out shooting Aurora all night. It wasn't even cold. Like, I would say it was maybe -2, -4, like none of these crazy cold temperatures. But because of the length of time I was outside and exposed to the cold temps, And obviously not paying attention to my own body because I was very just gobsmacked by watching the aurora. I didn't realize I'd gotten really cold. So I get in the car and I start blasting the heat, as you do, and if you've been out all night. And um, so I got home. It's like 5 o'clock in the morning. The sun is coming up. I literally like was out all night. Um, and I went to the bathroom sink to wash up and brush my teeth, and my face was covered in what looked like hives. I had like welts all over, and so I was like, "This is not good." We have a 1-800 number you can call and speak to a nurse, and she confirmed I had frostbite, but it wasn't that bad because my skin hadn't turned black. But it's really sensitive now. So when I go outside, even like -2, I have to cover all the skin on my face because otherwise that sensitivity is still there. And it's the same reaction. I get what looks like hives. It's aggravated the nerves, and it's no fun. But you can protect yourself from that if you have the right clothing on. And I basically just treat any kind of minus temperature the same. So if it's -5 or -20, I'm prepared to be out all night and stay warm. That's my number one. So these gloves are really awesome because I have it here because I had my whole duffel bag with me in the car. First of all, if you're out at Abraham Lake or some other place that's really windy, Iceland, they have a cuff on them, a wrist cuff. So if you take them off because you're crazy, and you shouldn't take them off, but if you do take them off, then you're not going to lose them in the wind. The best parts, though, are that you can buy the outer shell separate and a liner glove separate, but these ones in particular have the fingers. You can expose the fingers. They have touchscreen fingertips. And then when you close it up, it's got a leather mitten that's windproof. And there's pockets like so. And you can put those chemical warmers in it. And the chemical warmers are amazing. They help a lot. If it's really cold, I put a chemical warmer in the top of the mitten. And then I put one right inside. They do suggest that you don't have them next to your skin. I'm not sure if they've ever been out in -50, but when it's really cold, I can put one inside the palm of my hand, and then I can just pull the fingertips back and curl around the chemical warmer, and that helps a lot because to operate my camera, I have to pull this mitten back and reveal the fingers, and that can be cold if it's really cold. So chemical warmers, but it's protection from the wind, and I've never had a problem ever since I've had these gloves. So I use words like recommend, but these are basically required when people. I'm very polite Canadian, I highly recommend, but actually, no, you're kind of required to have these, just because it just takes all that stress and worry away that something bad is going to happen.
Yeah, definitely, and that cuff idea is brilliant because what I found being out in Iceland, when you whip your gloves off, you don't want to put them on the ground because it's blowing a gale. Mm-hmm. With strong wind, so you can just kiss them goodbye as they'd sail over the nearest cliff edge. It's a pain to stuff them in your pockets all the time. So the fact that they're attached to you, that's brilliant. Yeah, that's fantastic. I had a couple of Finnish tips or Finnish comments. There was one I liked, which was, there's a saying in Finland that 4 centimeters of ice supports a man and 2 centimeters an ice fisher. So some local Finnish humour. And in Finland they have different names for ice and snow. So steel ice, similar to what Rachel was talking about just then. Monopod spike is also good for hitting ice snow if you happen to fall through. And we've got a falling in a hole story coming up as well. Really right stuff makes clawed rock grip tripods, apparently, which might work on ice as well. And JD was asking if we'd have links for all the products, but I can get that from you at a later date, and I'll just put them in the YouTube description, so we can gather those and put those in, definitely. Yeah.
There is I have a link on my website. It's a blog article.
Oh yeah, it's all on there, isn't it?
All these listed with clickable links, so it makes it really easy if you're looking for stuff.
Yeah, I'll paste the link to you can't see it, Rachel, but I've just put the web page up, so I'll paste the link to that that gear page into the chat as well.
I was talking to somebody from the heat company last year when we had a Chinook, and I can't remember the term they have for it. I think she's in Austria, but they have a similar phenomenon to a Chinook, but they have a totally different word for it. So it's fascinating when you, like, going back to your the Finnish comment about different types of ice, like steel ice and stuff like that. I love that for people that are, live and work in the north, and winter is a big part of their existence because winter is so long. It's really fascinating that all these different terminologies come out that you maybe wouldn't think of otherwise. Okay, so a tip on jackets. So this is the excessive jacket. This is the one that I can't drive in it because it's basically the size of 2 sofas that have been sewn together. But I get cold really, really easily. People think that I'm just some sort of Eskimo or snowman, that I don't feel it. And that's totally not true. I am an absolute baby about being cold. So the whole idea when you're out in the cold is to be able to dress in layers. So I wear like a thermal layer, a base layer, usually merino wool or a synthetic. And then I'll wear either a fleece or a wool mid layer. And then I wear an outer layer, and the outer layer is typically wind and water resistant and then puffy. It's actually the air that is trapped next to our bodies that allows us to be warm. And so, like in these gloves, the mitten area, that becomes a pocket of warmth, especially when you have the chemical warmers in there. And it's the same thing with our jackets. So I typically will wear, a winter puffy. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with those, but just a puffy layer, kind of look like a marshmallow, like in my case, a green marshmallow. And then if the weather is fairly nice, so I'll have my base layer on, my wool sweater, I wear a puffy layer, and then I put on a Gore-Tex layer. So it'll be just wind and water resistant. And that's something I would wear if I was hiking or going out to visit an ice cave or something like that. So if any of you are doing that with me, I like to wear layers that I can move in and be hot and take layers off. But if I'm just standing around and it's really cold, this jacket is what I would go for. So Fjallraven advertises this as the never feel cold again, and it's 100% true. I have actually been out in -30 and been slightly too warm and have had to unzip the front of it. So that's pretty cool. Pretty awesome if you're somebody who doesn't like the cold like me.
Pretty not cool. Yeah.
pretty not cool. Yeah, pretty warm. Yeah. And for your camera, you can get these little lens warmers, and this helps a lot for lots of different things. It's not going to help your battery, okay? So batteries don't like the cold, and it doesn't matter if you're talking about AAA batteries or your camera batteries or your car battery. It's the same thing. So I've been out with it cold enough that car batteries won't turn over, and I've been out when it's cold enough that my car didn't want to produce warm air, that it just blew tepid air at me for 3 hours driving home one night. Again, these are the exceptions. I don't mean to scare all of you, but so it's the same thing with our cameras. There is a sort of limit of how the batteries will function in the cold. But when it comes to like your lenses and keeping frost off your lens, which, believe it or not, is a thing, lens warmers help quite a bit. They're a little bit cumbersome in the way that you have to have a battery bank to plug it into. So it's not drawing a charge from your camera. So you would wrap that coil around your lens, and then you can see it's got a cord that you would plug into like a battery bank. Then just imagining that it's cold, you need to have that battery bank somewhere where you can maybe wrap it in a warmer or, something like that. I went and bought a little basket to sit. It's just clips onto the tripod, and then it folds down with the tripod so that I can put that battery in there. And put it like a tea cozy essentially over it so that that battery will keep the lens warmer going. Typically, I don't need these things, but if I am, shooting at night or if I'm shooting for a few hours, they're super helpful because they will keep the frost off the lens. And when it comes to like frost on your lens, you're way better off to use the blower as much as possible to remove that instead of using the lens cloth, because the warmth from your hands will translate through that and you'll end up getting little streaks or smears, unless, of course, it's super cold. But typically, yeah, you can smear ice on the end of your lens if you're using a lens cloth. So use the blower where possible. And if the blower isn't working, then you have to go to the lens cloth. But if I have to use the lens cloth, I try not to use the flat parts of my hands, like the warm parts. I try to use the ends of my fingers and ball the lens cloth up a lot so that there's not a lot of heat coming from my hands onto the lens so that I get less of that smearing. So it can be a little tricky. Question?
Oh, sorry, I hid myself. Question on battery packs, because you mentioned battery packs and briefly mentioned about warming it as well. So the question was, how do you keep those warm? Do you find you need to keep the bigger battery packs warm? I guess otherwise their performance craters pretty much then.
Yeah, I mean, just like anything, right? Car battery, like if it's
True.
cold enough, the car battery is not going to work. So it doesn't really matter the size. The bigger ones are, they seem to last longer, and they're going to do a little better than a small battery. But it just depends on how cold it is, right? Keeping our average temperatures in mind, like most of the time, this is a non-issue. But I'm talking more about like when it gets a little colder. So. Yeah, even like a battery pack is going to drain faster in the cold. They just don't like being cold. Everything's down.
But I guess it's either keeping it close to your body, wrapping it in something.
Yeah. But if it's tethered to your lens and you need to move to stay warm, then keeping that close to your body isn't like
practical.
The battery pack. Yeah, that's not practical. But definitely keeping your batteries from your camera next to your body, that helps a little bit. And I do find batteries today for like our newer model cameras last really well. I've done time lapses for 6 hours, done 1800 frames in, minus 20 temperatures, but it depends. There's things you can do that will drain that battery faster. We can talk about, making sure your live view is not on and stuff like that, helps with your battery life when it's cold. Anything you can do to reduce the draw on it, really, but the cold will make it discharge a lot faster. Okay, so boots. I know everyone's going to have...
There was a boots question. Yeah, let me find the boots question, actually. Any recommendations for warm boots in Arctic climate? Baffin Impact. These are all names I don't know. Sorel Explorer XT, ? Other. So what do we got?
So I am going to refer all of you to the Outdoor Gear Lab. I put the web address on here because they do reviews of all the latest products. I am tired of cold feet, so I went to their gear review for this year to see what's best right now. I will say that they had listings for women and listings for men. So they had like the top 5 boots for women and the top 5 boots for men. And there's overlap there, but so the ones that I listed are best for women. But for like hiking, the UGG Adirondack is really good. So I was really hesitant to buy Uggs. I don't know why, but to me, they just don't seem like hiking boots. They seem more like slippers. Okay. But now that I've got that off my chest, I did buy a pair a few weeks ago, and I have been out in minus 25 and my feet stayed warm without the chemical warmers. So I thought they were really quite good. I've used the Muck Arctic boots before. So these are a neoprene boot. They're tall. They come up to almost to my knee. I'm a tall girl though, so probably come up to most people's knees. And they're quite warm. So they're not super breathable, and they're not really great for, you wouldn't want to wear them hiking because they're not fitted enough for that. But if you were going to stand around in some puddles or some, a little tiny stream somewhere, they're perfect. When I go to Norway, I am going to make sure that I have my mucks with me because then I can be, along the ocean and have water splashing up on me, and I won't worry about being cold at all. So those are the two that I am currently recommending. And if you are looking for something just slightly different, I mean, I specifically chose the UGG for the hiking, and the Muck for standing around in water. But Outdoor Gear Lab has really great reviews. Like, I've used them for tents, and I think they test everything very rigorously. So I trust their opinion.
That's awesome. Great resource. And actually, I tried a pair of Muck boots, but I have weird shaped feet, but they're amazing. They're amazing build.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely fantastic. I just couldn't find a pair that fit me, but that's more my fault genetically than anything else. But build quality, yeah, they're brilliant. There was a question for as we were talking about batteries and hanging it off on tripod. I know you work with Slick to some extent as well. Did Rachel have a recommendation for where to get a little basket that folds up with a tripod, or is that like a homemade contraption?
No, I bought mine off of B&H.
Okay.
I wish I had a picture for you, but there's a B&H brand, and then there was a Vanguard. I actually ordered a couple just so I could see what the difference was.
Right.
It arrived about a week and a half ago, so I haven't been out to see if I like one better than the other. They were roughly the same size, but yeah, just have a look. They're like $30 items. They just clip onto your tripod, and they're like a little triangle, like a little piece of fabric essentially, but more weather resistant than just a piece of fabric. And then a good basket for putting things in, so remote controls and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely.
And for working at night, I think it's going to be really helpful, because then I can, if I'm doing, say, longer exposures where I need to be in bulb and run something for 2 minutes, then I can tuck the remote into a warm pouch with the battery and keep it covered. It sounds weird, but I like using the tethered remotes for night shooting, and I can explain why, but just to kind of keep it short, I like the tethered remotes because there's no flashing red light on the front, which is really annoying for night shooting. But then it's also really annoying because the battery wants to die in the remote control, because there are a couple little AAA batteries, and I can't put it in my pocket and keep moving. So the whole idea is to build like a little cozy, something I could put chemical warmers in or something like that, have my battery in there, have my remote in there, and have it just tucked in next to the camera, because the battery is obviously tethered to the lens. So
cool. Yeah, I did a quick Google of tripod basket, and a bunch of stuff comes up, and it seems like it's a popular accessory for fishing and bird watching, all kinds of stuff. So there's loads of choice.
Yeah. And they're pretty inexpensive. So, okay. So we got the cold out of the way. All right. So we talked about layers and keeping warm and mittens and chemical warmers and even playing on the ice safely a little bit. But for me, when I think about winter, I actually think about really long winter nights. So depending on where you are in the world, I wrote down some latitudes here for different, I guess, popular places to visit for winter, sunrise and sunset times. And I chose winter solstice, December 21st, as my day for comparison. So this is all for, basically next week, coming up in a week or two here. So in Banff National Park, we, even on the longest winter nights or shortest of days, we still get about 8 hours of daylight and roughly 16 hours of darkness. Now, for me personally, I love that because I'm a night photographer. So I'm like, bring it on. I was looking at, I'm probably going to butcher the name, but Leknes, Norway. And it's not complete darkness because the sun gets close enough near the horizon that there's golden hour. So there's some light, but the sun doesn't actually get over the horizon. And I was thinking, that's where I need to be right now, so that all of these auroras that I keep missing because they happen in my daylight hours, I just wouldn't have to miss them anymore. I could be there and
just stay out 24 hours a day waiting.
It'd be dark all the time. I could just leave the cameras run all the time. I get so much shooting in. So kind of cool to think about it like that. So this is like thinking more in terms of the sun, so you know, towards winter solstice, we have shorter days and much longer nights. But even the moon is more interesting when you travel north, or I find it super interesting because for once you get sort of north of about 60 degrees latitude, there is a period of time every month when the moon doesn't rise. So you have a moon that's always invisible. And that's like about 3 to 5 days, depending on how far north you travel. And then conversely, there's also 3 to 5 days every month where the moon doesn't set. So you get a circumpolar moon. And my first experience with this was in Dawson City, Yukon. And that's in September or even August. And so this year I was planning a trip, and I went with clients first, and then I went for myself a second week. And of course, when I work with clients, I want to make sure they have the best possible conditions, but I don't always get to shoot. So I had, sort of the best week with the best window for the moon when I had the clients. And then I was looking at the next week and looking at the moon calendar, and I was like, lamenting a little bit that it was on its way to a full moon. And I like dark skies. Moonlight, working with moonlight's nice, but once it gets to like 80 or 100% moon, it's like, ugh. But I went digging a little closer, and I realized that I had 3 or 4 days of invisible moon. And then the moon just didn't get high enough to rise, right? So I had 3 nights of no moon. And then when it did rise, it was so fascinating because it rose at 8:00 p.m. and set at 8:35 p.m. And it was already dark, but it was a big moon. It was like an 80% moon. And it just went blip across the horizon. And then the next day it stayed on the horizon. So again, it just didn't get very high, but it was essentially like nearing a full moon. And it stayed really low on the horizon, didn't get above 2 degrees for the next couple of nights. So you're like, Rachel, you're being super weird about this right now. But it's really cool because when it's low on the horizon like that, you get basically the same kind of light you would get during golden hour from the sun, but from the moon. So you get peak light. The image on the left is basically darkness. So I think the moon was just starting to come up, and there's a little bit of side light on the mountain. The image on the right was the moon was up, but low on the horizon. And then the time lapse in the middle, you can kind of see what happens when the moon comes up and moves behind those clouds. But basically what you get is this really warm, soft light from the moon, kind of like golden hour from the sun, but at night. And so the clouds will turn sort of a peachy, pinky color, depending on your white balance, of course. And you'll get peak light, which can be very much like daytime peak light. It's really warm light on the mountains, or on whatever you happen to be shooting. So this was August, but I love the example for what happens when the moon comes up just a little bit, or when you get that really big full moon that just sits on the horizon. And so that's one of the really fascinating things I think happens in the wintertime, especially in these northern areas, is that we get, periods of time where the moon just doesn't come up. And then when it does, it stays really low on the horizon for quite a while. And it's a really beautiful type of light that is actually my favorite thing to photograph at night, anywhere, anytime. So even over a Milky Way. And it's pretty fun when it comes with aurora. This happens to be that kind of situation where there was a storm moving through. This is twilight hours. The moon was coming up, so the moon was lighting some of the clouds in that sort of peachy tone, and then you could see the aurora in the background. This is a better example because it's a time lapse, so you can see clouds moving through. You can see the aurora dancing behind that, and then these sort of peachy toned clouds in the beginning. And then as the moon gets higher, so in this one, this is from 2 years ago, but as the moon gets higher, then it's not that sort of warm light anymore. It gets really more harsh, just like when the sun gets high.
Yeah, it's really amazing the difference in color tone just in that short period of time as well. So which shows why you do have to stand around for long periods waiting for that right moment. Question on the app, was that photo pills that we were looking at? The
Yeah.
the moon phase app. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
PhotoPills is amazing. So in this one, I'll see if I can make this one play for us. This little thing here on the side. What's interesting about this is, so I started at the beginning of January, and at first we had a circumpolar moon, which means it doesn't set. If you're watching this line down here near the bottom, that's actually the horizon and then the moon and the sun at that time. So when we have, so January 19th, 2023, and I think this is in, I want to say Norway. Is that Leknes, Norway? So you can see that you don't actually get much time with the sun, but also the moon times here. So you can watch the curve of the moon. Here at the very beginning of the month, you get a higher moon. And if you scroll down, you can see how many degrees above the horizon that is and at what time. So even what type of light you have at that time of night. So for the super nerds out there, my favorite light is moon that's between 0 and 20 degrees above the horizon, but a nice big full moon during astronomical twilight. It's magical because then that's when you get a lot of those pinky tones, and you get that really soft light from the moon. But anyway, so yeah, this is PhotoPills.
As long as it's not
If you're not
cloudy,
using
right?
What's that?
As long as it's not cloudy.
Well, okay, so the thing with the moon conditions, I like the same amount of clouds that I would for sunrise or sunset.
So some
Because if
clouds, yeah.
there's no clouds, then you just get a wash
Boring.
of light. It kind of washes things out. But if there's clouds, then you get that contrast. You get those pinks and stuff like that in there that you wouldn't otherwise get. So
Fantastic.
PhotoPills is a super tool for any kind of planning. I use it all the time. You know, people use it for Milky Way. They use it for position of the moon and stuff like that. And I use it for literally everything. I have a couple more examples of stuff we can talk about as well. I am like a little low on time, so I'm not going to deep dive into any of my night photography stuff. I do have, I mean, we could talk, and I do talk about Aurora for hours. I could talk about shooting Orion for hours, and I could talk about shooting the Milky Way for hours.
That's the next three live streams, right?
And it's really fascinating. But when you have nights that are long in the wintertime, these are some of the conditions you can get. What you're seeing in these images are little frost flowers that form in places where the water's kind of running underneath the ice. So this is a really shallow stream or a shallow bit of water at the edge of a lake, and you'll get these gorgeous frost flowers that form only when it's cold. So you need like minus 20 roughly for these, but it's super pretty conditions. Milky Way starts in roughly February in the Canadian Rockies. As you move more north, that changes, and there are places where you just don't get to see the Milky Way core. You would see parts of the Milky Way, but not the core. But so I won't spend much time there, but I will give you a few tips for working during the night. And my first would be bright monitoring. This is a custom function on a Sony camera, I think, but I'm not 100% sure, that Canon has come out with something similar. But what this does is it allows you to see in real time your whole situation at night. The camera boosts the internal gain, and so it allows you to see as if you had night vision. I don't have an example in these slides here at the moment, but when you're looking at the back of the screen, it's typically black. You don't see anything, but with bright monitoring, you can actually illuminate your foreground, see where the aurora is, see where the Milky Way core is. You can see all of that stuff. And it's not the same as just cranking your ISO and your shutter time and stuff like that. It's actually boosting the internal gain. So bright monitoring is a way of finding a composition really quickly. And if you're working in the cold, that's an important thing to be able to do, especially if you're out aurora shooting and you you show up at a place in the middle of the night, or your night's just 24 hours long, whatever the case may be, this will allow you to find a composition really quickly. Another couple of good tips on just, shooting at night and getting sharp focus. A lot of people struggle with that. And if you're cold, it's even worse because you can't manage the camera as effectively. So there are some things that can make it easier for you. One is this Sharp Star filter by Lonely Speck. It's basically a Badenoff mask, if anybody has ever heard of that. You can see that it's a filter holder that goes on over your lens, and there's different sizes available. And then you slide a little plastic piece inside, and it has those lines on it. And as you move your focus, you'll see an X that goes across your largest points of light. So that could be a street light, or it could be your stars. And then as you find focus, you'll get a line that bisects that X. So if I'm doing any sort of product testing, I always use a Badenoff mask. This is my favorite one, this Sharp Star filter by Lonely Speck, just to make sure that I'm doing it correctly. Once I get to know a lens, it's not a problem, but there's sort of that early stage when you're like not sure, is this a lens error or a human error? And I don't like human error, so I would use one of these.
So sorry, Rachel, just to clarify that filter, so that helps you to find infinity of that lens, or yeah, without guesswork. Yeah, that's super cool. I've never heard of one of those before. Yeah,
and it's for people that struggle with focus, which is, if you don't have focus, you don't have a night shot. Like no. You can go there all night. If it's out of focus, you're going to go home and cry. So there's other things you can use as well. Sometimes the focus stacking, it's not enough time, David. I don't have enough
time. Jim actually commented earlier, we've got all the time in the world, but I know you're going to get kicked out of your hotel room in the not too distant future.
I'm in the middle of nowhere, Saskatchewan. So quick story is I booked this specific hotel room because checkout was at noon, and my time was scheduled for 10:30 Mountain. Well, then I ended up in Saskatchewan, not realizing there's an hour time difference. And so my 10:30 Mountain became 11:30 Central, and I had to check out in half an hour. So I asked for a late checkout, but I'm expecting housekeeping to be knocking at any moment, like
banging on the door. We just barricade it. Yeah.
So hopefully you all understand if that happens. Yeah. I'm like embarrassed now, turning red. Anyway, so I teach an online class about night photography. It's literally paining me to not explain all of these things. But my online class is like 10 days and, 90 minutes a day just talking about theory, and then another 90 minutes a day talking about editing or whatever. So for me to try to just be like, here's a few little tips, it's paining me to not, share more.
It's tough. Okay. We're sorry. Yeah. Okay, carry on.
There's also a remote for the Sony cameras. Specifically, some camera systems have like focus stacking built in, but the Sony remote commander, you can flip through from a close focal point, which you can use autofocus to focus on, take that shot, put the camera in manual, and then you can use a step function on the remote to move to infinity. And that actually will get you fairly close to sharp stars, or like, I say fairly close, I always like to double check, but Sharp Star filter and the commander remote, or using your focus stacking in camera software can help you to get to infinity. Okay, so photopills, I briefly mentioned. This is using photopills to find when the Milky Way core is going to be visible, more specific to here. But there's other really great functions, like you can use the spot stars function, or they call it pills. So you can use the spot stars pill, and you can put in your camera's specific information. So you enter in the name of your camera. I have the A7S III as an example up here. And then your focal length, mine in this example is 12 millimeters, f2.8. And then it'll give you some different values. There's the default value and then the accurate values. If you just tap default, you can get to accurate. And basically what it tells you is what is the longest you can leave your shutter open given your particular camera's sensor and the focal length and aperture that you're working at, without getting star trails or with getting minimal star trailing. So if you're photographing stars, you want nice little pinpoint points of light. But if the shutter's open too long, you'll get little dashes instead. I really don't like the little dashes. So I typically will go for the accurate settings. And you can see that based on that camera, my shutter could be open for about 13 seconds. And that's a far cry from the 500 rule. If you take this is like the old rule, typically from DSLR days. But if you take your 500 divided by your focal length would give you the amount of seconds you could leave your camera open before you'd start to get star trails. And so you can see there's a really big difference there. The 500 rule would say 41 seconds. But even if I didn't mind a little bit of trailing, which is what this default setting is, I would still get a little bit of trailing by 27 seconds. So PhotoPills is an amazing tool. And if you have this information and you already know I'm going to be shooting wide open, it's nighttime, I'm shooting wide open at 2.8 or 1.4 or whatever. This is the camera and lens focal length I'm using. So now I've taken care of this second variable, which is how long can I leave the shutter open? The last variable you have to work with is just your ISO. So that gets into a whole other can of worms that I do not have time to talk about, but you can reference this slide. I do a lot of stacking for noise reduction if I'm shooting something that's not moving a whole bunch, like the Milky Way. That looks different if I'm shooting aurora, but doing blue hour blends, this is what settings I would lean towards, where I shoot my foreground during blue hour and then I shoot my night sky at the nighttime, and I shoot at high ISOs, stack 20 shots for noise reduction. And aurora is a little different. I try to do single image skies and either blue hour foregrounds or shooting for stacking for noise reduction. This is a whole other can of worms, but so I don't want to explain it too much. Okay, so that gets me to sort of a wrap up, I guess, here. And the biggest advice I have for anybody going out shooting, doesn't matter if you're traveling to Iceland or Norway or the Canadian Rockies, or if you're just shooting in your own backyard, if you're out there playing on the ice or you're out there, just doing anything in winter, know your environment. It's really, really important. So at home here, I do extensive planning. Like I know everything about the area. I know what weather conditions I'm going to be expecting. I know how much light I'm going to be expecting. When I do something where I'm sort of off the grid or I'm not in contact with my family or whatever, I file a safety plan, usually with my oldest son, because he will actually go looking for me if I don't report in on time. And I do a lot of training. I've done guide training. I've done glacier, traverse, and crevasse rescue training a few times now. I did it, I want to say 2 years ago, and then this spring fell in a crevasse. So I thought it'd be good to, retrain and refresh myself on things like knots and whatnot. So these are some of the skills that I developed so that I can go out and play in the environment that I have safely. So really just know where you're going to go. Even when you know where you're going to go, that doesn't mean that you're not going to find trouble. I found a little bit of trouble I think it was February or March, when I fell into a crevasse. So I was out with some friends, that's Eamon Cullen there, Mary Beth Kaczynski, Brian Peters, who was my rescuer that day. But Eamon says that photography is a team sport. And never was that more true than when I fell in this nice little hole. Looks like a heart shape, doesn't it? I look at it and I'm like, oh, it's a kind little hole.
I assume you couldn't see the hole when you were walking.
No. So a little bit of background. We were going out to an ice cave that day. And we knew that there were some crevasses in the area near the opening of the cave. And we only knew it because some locals found it the hard way a few weeks before. So, knowing that there's some risk, and obviously we've got some training, we know what to do. We stopped in about 2 kilometers before the cave entrance. We roped together. So that means that the lead person is the most likely to fall through a snow bridge or find a crevasse the hard way or whatever. I was the lead person. And then the other people, if you've roped properly, they will support the weight of the fall and arrest the fall so that you don't fall like the full length of the crevasse or the full depth of the crevasse. So we stopped to rope up. We had all of our safety gear. I was in snowshoes, but I had crampons in my backpack. I wore a helmet, which I'm certain saved my life. So wear your safety gear. And, I had avalanche gear and stuff. And my friend Mary Beth, she'd never been out to an ice cave, and she was a little bit nervous. And so we had a nice long walk, 8 kilometers out there for her to think about it. And she started to get a little bit of anxiety. And I just stopped and talked to her, and I was like, girl, like, don't worry about it. We have all this, we do this planning, we have all this safety gear with us, but we never need it. So, we're going over like worst case scenario, everything's going to work out. It's going to be fine. Famous last words. So, I am the lead person on this team, and it was my job to probe. Let's see if I can get this thing to play so you can see. We're all roped together. We're all in snowshoes. That's me at the back there. I've got a probe. And the probe is to basically look for those holes. You can see at the very back, that little blue spot was our ice cave opening. And so we had a distance to travel. You can see there it is in the back, where the terrain's not so known. There was some element of risk there. So I'm probing along, my snowshoe slips a little bit, and I went to go just naturally, like reflexively, get something, find some purchase, find some grip, some traction on a bit of snow because I was on ice. And I'd been probing in front of me, and I stepped a little bit to the left, and that's when I went straight through this hole. Of course, Mary Beth is the person right behind me, and she's horrified because one minute I was there and the next minute I was not there. I fell about 12 feet. That's Brian coming to check on me. So after he set an anchor and made sure that was safe, he was anchored to an actual anchor in the ice, and he was able to come up to the edge, safely. So he probed his way along the edge, found where it was the most thin, and so he came in and checked on me. And that's from inside of the crevasse. So you can see that's where I fell. I'm standing there. There's always a risk of a secondary snow bridge. So I had to make sure that I was on really good solid ground where I was. I took off my backpack and sent it up to Brian. It was funny when he came to the hole and he's like, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine." I was obviously like had so much adrenaline flooding through me. But he's like, "Okay, send up your bag." And I'm like, "Yeah, right. Save the Sony first. I'll remember that for next time we're out together." But anyways, yeah, so I awkwardly fell sort of upside down because the weight of your head and your backpack pulls you head first down these things. But the rope did stop me from going too far. I was wedged into some ice. I couldn't roll. I couldn't free myself. I had to somehow bring my shoes, which were above my snowshoes, which were above my head, to my body, unfasten them. I tried taking my backpack off, but the way that I was wedged in the ice, even though I undid the straps, the backpack was just sort of pulling down the slope and kind of like trying to drag me with it. So it was really awkward to free myself. And I was very calm the entire time I was freeing myself. It was like being in a weird, surreal, like, oh, I'm clearly upside down, like these things are going through my head, like, oh, this is awkward. Or, I guess I can't really move. I'll have to try and get my snowshoes off. And everything was all very like slow motion for me at that time. I didn't have any recollection of falling. I could have blacked out, I don't know, for a few seconds. But when I came to, I was looking straight down a crevasse that just got deeper. It was about 20 feet in the direction I was looking. And then once I got myself righted and Brian checked on me and I knew he was rigging the anchor and the pulley system to get me out, then the adrenaline kicked in, and I was like the worst kind of rescuee because I really couldn't focus on anything. I couldn't remember how to tie a knot. Like I couldn't remember how to tie a basic figure of 8 knot. Luckily, I had Brian, and he knew all the knots to tie and had actually had the forethought to just practice those before we left the night before. So all was well. That's me, shaken, not stirred, I like to say, after falling in the crevasse. But it just goes to show that you really, even when you're prepared, even when you have the best training and you have all the gear with you and everything like that, things still go sideways. And if we weren't prepared, if we weren't roped together, if I hadn't been wearing a helmet, this would have been a totally different story. I would have been injured for sure. As it was just adrenaline. I didn't have a scratch on me. I didn't have a bruise. I felt enough distance that I should have been pretty banged up, but it all turned out really well.
Yep, just goes to show gear is important. Yeah.
Yeah, and really knowing and understanding your environment. And if it's foreign to you, if you're traveling, when I watch people go out on Abraham Lake all the time, and granted, most of the time you're looking at 2 feet of ice, but there are sections of the lake where the water's flowing, and maybe you have a thin crust of 2 inches of ice that you have to cross to get to the 2 feet of ice.
Sure.
And people don't understand that just because it's thick or just because they see somebody else out there doesn't necessarily mean that it's safe. And so I like to ask the trick questions. If you're meeting up with me for a workshop, just be prepared. I'm going to be asking you all the trick questions. Is it safe to go out on the ice? And if you see other people out there and you say, yeah, it's safe, they're out there, that's probably not going to pass the test.
Nope.
So anyways, yeah, a little cautionary tale that ended really well, but really knowing where you're going and what to expect weather-wise, how do you prepare for that? Safety-wise, how do you prepare for that? This is inside the cave here. That's Brian's hero shot. P.S. That's Brian up there on that mound of snow. I like that because it really reminds me of the day. And then this is Brian here as well. This is a cave on the other side of the glacier from a different trip when I didn't fall through. This is the same cave from a different angle. They're just fascinating the way that they form. Most caves are formed by water running beneath and over the glacier. You can get a moulin, which happens here when the water, it'll like flow down the glacier, hit a rock or something, swirl around, and then travel down. And as it swirls, it makes the opening bigger and bigger, or it burrows into the ice more and more. And then you get like a little hole. And this icicle is like 30 feet tall. It's the biggest icicle I ever saw in my life. That one looks like it's over the person, but it's not. So don't stand under an icicle because that could be really dangerous. I wouldn't stand under that. Not for all the money in the world. I don't want to be impaled. But so yeah, ice caves are usually formed by water moving. And they're sometimes also formed by seracs, like hanging ice, which is pretty dangerous. So yeah, if you're going out to play, just be really, really mindful when you do. I always carry an emergency roadside kit, an avalanche shovel, emergency blankets, micro spikes, like I showed you guys, water snacks, warm layers. Even just traveling out here to Saskatchewan, I have all my warm layers with me. And my number one thing for any kind of adventure is the Garmin InReach. I have a small one now. I have the InReach Mini 2. And it's a little device that allows you to communicate via satellite. So I can be in an area where there's no cell phone. I can be in the backcountry and communicate with home. There's a little delay with it, and you can only type so many characters at a time. But it pairs with my phone, so I can use a Bluetooth app, and so that I can basically text, but it's going via satellite. I can get weather updates. I can have my friends and family track my progress on a backcountry trip without me checking in. So they're really, really great. These are life-saving devices, and I highly recommend having them. And we talked a little bit about this already. So I think I managed to get through it. I'm only 14 minutes late.
Yeah,
no tapping on the
that's
door,
pretty good. That's pretty good. Have we got 5 minutes for a couple of closing questions?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Quick, easy one from Jason. The ice caves, was that in Iceland or Canada? I can't remember
This is
what you said.
Canada.
Canada.
The
Yeah.
ice caves in Iceland are a lot more easy to access,
Hmm.
but they also tend to look a little different too. This one, the locals call Big Blue. This one's been around for a couple of seasons, but they do change seasonally as the glacier moves. The glacier is basically like it's flowing water, but it's frozen. And so it does all this bending and
Very
cracking
cool.
and all these crazy things as it comes down the mountain, but they're constantly moving. Um, and Big Blue is really fascinating because, like, look at the frost formations at the top of the cave on this side. And then you can see there's some ice fall from the summertime or whatever from when the temperatures were warmer. So you can see the ice on the bottom of the cave floor. This is the other side of Big Blue, where there's like these big moulins and these icicles
Mm.
that formed last year. And this is Big Blue. So you can see on this side of the cave, so the other image was shot sort of more from the right and behind. On this side, you don't get the frost formations on the roof of it just because of the way the wind and air is moving through. Yeah, sometimes some people skate in these things. Like they can bring a pair of skates and there's enough flat ice that you can skate. I know Paul Zitska has skated in a few. I don't think I'm that brave. I don't know. I feel like I'm pretty brave, but not
Not that
maybe brave.
brave. Question
Uh,
from.
yeah.
Sorry, carry on if hadn't
No,
finished.
go ahead.
Now, question from Harold regarding camera gear. So you're exclusively Sony, correct?
Yeah.
Do you do any weatherproofing, or because I mean I have Sony as well, but I can't remember the specific weatherproofing specification or whatever. I've been out behind waterfalls in Iceland and it's got pretty wet. But I guess frost is probably less of an issue compared to water.
Yeah. So you would be amazed at how well these cameras actually deal with uh, weather, frost.
Yeah, it's pretty frosty there.
Pretty hard on here. Like I don't take care of it very well. Like I just sort of leave it out there. I'm pretty okay with as long as I'm not cold, you know. My safety is the most important thing to me. And then secondarily to that, I'm like, oh, maybe I should throw a rain sleeve on. If I put a rain sleeve on this camera before I
Mm.
left it running a time lapse all night in -20 next to the water, then it wouldn't have gotten frost on it. But you know, sometimes you're out there and you're like, oh, it'll
It'll
be
be
fine.
fine. It'll be fine.
So when I get frost like that, I just make sure that I brush it off. Like I'll blow it as much as possible, then I'll brush it. Because when it comes to temperature inside my bag, I want to make sure that I'm not melting water into the buttons and stuff like that. But frost is actually totally like it's I don't want to say it's harmless, but I've never had a problem with it as long as I deal with it without letting it melt. I don't want all
Mm.
that to be water and melting in my bag. So I really try to get it cleaned off before I put it back in the bag. I never bring my camera out from the cold and then put it in a warm environment. So because you'll get condensation
Yeah,
inside the
absolutely.
lens, inside the body, whatever. So if I need to take batteries out or cards, that's totally fine. I'll open up my bag, take those things out, close up the bag, and then your camera bag is like a natural dehumidifier, so it kind of keeps things dry and slowly regulates the temperature so that you don't have those big fluctuations. So it's okay to go from a warm environment and then take your camera out into the cold, but if you do the reverse, you're going to have some condensation inside of it.
Hmm. Yeah, we had some tips from our Finnish contingent watching about exactly that. Just be careful moving from different temperature environments. Yeah, in the bag is a good dehumidifier, silica gel, all that kind of stuff makes sense.
Silica gel
Yeah.
works. Yeah, I've used those. That's helpful to have them in there. And just treating the frost like a solid, when it's a solid, don't let it become a liquid,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, because that's quite a lot of water quantity should it get warm. Yeah,
I did
yeah.
have a situation once where I had a water droplet, which was actually from my nose, embarrassingly enough, but it worked its way into the shutter. So I didn't realize it. I was shooting at night. I had set up one camera. I went back to set up my A1. My A1 was pretty new at the time, if I recall correctly. And, that's a pretty pricey camera, but I clicked the shutter button. It went, meep, meep. And I was like, what? So I pressed it again, meep, meep, nothing. And I was like, well, and I was clearly frustrated. So I did it a third time because that's smart. Before turning on my light and realizing there was a droplet of water that I had literally just worked into the shutter 3 times by pressing the button. And all I did in that situation was I took the battery out. I left the camera in the on position to discharge any electrical charge left in the camera. I picked this up on YouTube like forever ago when I got something wet. And it works. So I brought it into my sleeping bag. I was camping at the time. So I kept the camera warm, brought it into my sleeping bag, slept with it. The next morning it worked absolutely fine.
Phew.
Uncomfortable, but did the job. So
okay, I shall pick 2 questions, and then I think that will probably have to be it before housekeeping boot you out. Hans was asking a while ago, is there some kind of gloves that are thin and still warm enough to work with? Says the ones you were showing were quite thick. Says a doctor I was traveling with in northeast China and Russia used surgical rubber gloves, which I didn't think would be very warm actually. But the ones you have, they're quite thin once you're under the mitt part, aren't they?
Yeah, so the mitt is pretty cool because it folds back and it has a magnet on it. So I don't know if you can see my hands. These fold back to reveal the fingers. And this is just a liner glove in here with a touch screen. So I can use these just fine. I still seem to go through a training phase every October as it starts to snow. And I'm like, I'll be fine. And then I take them off and regret my life choices.
It's no fun having cold hands, really, is it?
Especially if you're touching metal, like changing a battery, or you have to take your camera off the tripod and it's actually cold. Like, it's really hard on your hands to touch cold things. Have you ever stuck your tongue to a frozen flagpole?
Quite typical childhood experiences. And let's find one more question. Sorry, we can't answer everybody's question today, but I'll put up your blog as well. Yeah, do you want to find your last slide as well, because that's got your website link? But YouTube, Facebook, I'm just going to put a link. And also, if you're in the webinar room, if you look at the top of the chat, you'll see a pinned comment with Rachel's website as well. So the last, there's a question I can answer, which I'll do in a second. I did find an interesting one, but I can't remember where it was. Maybe it was over on YouTube. We did that one. Oh yeah, Pavel, that was just a tip. Children in Poland have a string attached to their gloves. I did that as a kid as well, going through their sleeves and through their neck so you don't lose them. It's actually a great idea. So I might put some string on between mine. So that was one of our Finnish friends. Yeah, I have the Heat Company chemical warmers, so I'll try that. Oh, that was an answer to someone else. Chemical, it's normally Jyrki was saying from Finland that they tape chemical heaters to power banks and put it in a mitten or a fur hat. Yeah, I haven't found a better solution yet myself. The question I can answer, Shirley was asking, do you have experience shooting during 24 hours of sunlight? Is there a golden hour as well? Yes, there is a golden hour. So when I was out in Iceland in summer, it was awesome because rather than having to rush and do your long exposures as quick as possible, this golden hour just extends. So it's fantastic. So, and the good news is people don't like staying up late either. So if you're prepared to stay up late at midnight, you can shoot in the daylight. So.
Yep. So golden hour is just a period of time when the sun is a certain distance relative to the horizon. I'm not sure if that's, a few degrees or how many degrees it is, but there's light from the sun, but it has, in the case of sunrise, golden hour happens before the sun actually comes up. So you get golden light, but without the ball of the sun actually coming above the horizon. So even in in Norway, the most northern latitude that I looked at, which was 68 degrees, even though the sun didn't technically come up over the horizon, there's still that period of time where there's golden light. That's in the winter. And then the reverse would be true in the summer, where the sun just doesn't set. And so what is happening is you get this long period of time when the sun is really close to the horizon. And that's why you get these extended golden hours and stuff like that. Same with the moon. When I talked about the moon going through that period of that invisibility phase for a few days, and then when it does rise, that it finally rises and it stays really close to the horizon. It's like a golden hour, but for the moon. So it's really, really good light. It's really nice time to shoot.
Absolutely. Closing comment from Felix said, I'm sure happy they poured you out the crevasse. At the same time, the photos from inside are amazing. Wonderful presentation. Thank you. So I'm glad they pulled you out too, definitely. Yeah. So up on screen, you can see Rachel's website as well. A few workshops coming up as well. So if you want to go and see the bubbles, frozen bubbles yourself, then not far off, January 13th. So that would be a fun trip.
Yeah, most of my winter workshops are fully full, like sold out. But I do have a couple spaces in the January one. I think mostly because people are pretty timid about January weather, even though
yep.
you can get that weather. You can get it in October, so but it's more likely to happen in January in truth. So
for sure, cool. And I've put the link to the gear blog. Both on YouTube, Facebook, and as I said, in the webinar room, link up top, you can find the link to the blog as well. So thanks again, Rachel, for joining us today. It's a pleasure as always, and I'm glad you didn't get booted out of the hotel before we had time to finish. Exactly. So thanks for spending the morning chatting to us as well, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the week shooting and working as per usual.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Thank you guys for tuning in today and listening to my stories, and I know that I get to see a few of you in the coming months, so I'm looking forward to that.
Fantastic.
And hopefully get to do this again sometime.
Absolutely. We'd do a round two for sure. Absolutely. All right. Thanks again, everybody. And thanks to you, Rachel. And take care. Enjoy the rest of your week and the weekend when it comes. Cheers. Bye now. Bye.
Bye.